So let's talk about one of biology's most fascinating and, let's be honest, most stressful countdowns, the biological clock. It's this invisible timer that really governs female fertility. And if we want to understand human reproduction, well, we have to understand this clock.
But what happens when that clock runs out way, way too soon? We're talking decades early. For some women, this isn't just a what if, it's a very challenging reality.
And you might be surprised just how many women we're talking about. The estimates right now show that about 1 in every 100 women are affected by this. That's a huge number of people facing a reproductive window that's been dramatically cut short.
Okay, so what is this condition? It's called Premature Ovarian Insufficiency, or POI for short. And you can think of it as, essentially, menopause hitting before the age of 40. The root cause is a really rapid loss of a woman's supply of eggs. But, and this is crucial, the consequences go way beyond just infertility. POI is actually linked to some serious health risks, things like cardiovascular disease and osteoporosis, which makes it a major, lifelong health concern.
So, to really get a handle on what POI is, we first have to understand the core concept behind all of female fertility, the ovarian reserve. And honestly, the best way to think about it is like a biological bank account.
The idea here is incredibly simple but also profound. A woman is born with a fixed number of potential eggs. That's her starting balance. And throughout her life, she can only make withdrawals. There are no new deposits ever. That balance just goes in one direction, down. Now, here's what's so wild about this whole bank account thing. When is it established? It's not at puberty, not even close. It's actually set up before a woman is even born. This timeline here shows that incredible journey, starting way back in the embryo, setting up the entire ovarian reserve while still in fetal development. It's just amazing. So at birth, that biological bank account is at its peak balance. We're talking about 1 million dormant potential eggs, which are called primordial follicles. That is the absolute maximum number she will ever have. Okay, but get ready for the really mind-blowing part. Of that huge starting number, 1 million, only about 400 will ever fully mature and actually be ovulated. Just 400. The vast, overwhelming majority are just lost over time through a natural process of decay. Right, so that leads us straight into the central scientific mystery here. If you've got 1 million eggs just sitting there, dormant, what's the follicle's on switch? What is it that wakes these potential eggs up and tells them to start their journey? This is the big puzzle. What flips that switch? What is the molecular signal that singles out one dormant follicle from all the others and says, okay, it's your turn? You know, figuring this out is really the key to managing fertility. This slide gives us a peek at the complex signaling going on. Now, don't worry about all the technical labels, just focus on the big idea. On the left, you've got a dormant follicle. It's basically being told stay asleep by all these inhibitor signals. Then on the right, promoter signals have come in, woken it up, and triggered it to start growing. You know, the easiest way to think about this whole process is like the accelerator and brake system in a car. Inside the ovary, certain molecules are acting like a constant brake, keeping all those follicles dormant. But when other signals come along and lift that brake, the accelerator gets pushed, and the activation process kicks off. But, and this is a huge but for researchers, what we learn from animal models doesn't always work for humans. For instance, scientists found a key off-switch protein in mice, but it turns out that protein isn't even present in human eggs. This is a perfect example of why doing human-specific research is just so critical. So if this is supposed to be a carefully controlled system of brakes and accelerators, what makes it go haywire? What are the factors that can slam on that accelerator and speed up the countdown, leading to conditions like POI?
Well, it turns out there are several known culprits. You have iatrogenic factors. That's a fancy term for things caused by medical treatments, like chemotherapy. Then there are genetic factors, especially abnormalities on the X chromosome. You've also got environmental exposures, like smoking and toxins. And finally, autoimmunity, which is when the body's own immune system can actually attack the ovaries.
Let's take a closer look at chemotherapy. These are life-saving drugs, of course, but they work by targeting rapidly dividing cells, and that can really harm the supportive cells around an egg. The big question for scientists right now is, how exactly? Does the chemo just kill the follicles directly, or does it mess with that brake system, causing all of them to wake up at once and burn out? And it's not just major medical treatments. Things we're exposed to every day can also play a part.
common toxins like bisphenol A or BPA, which you find in some plastics, and of course the thousands of chemicals in cigarette smoke. They've been directly linked to a drop in that primordial follicle pool because they can disrupt all that delicate signaling inside the ovary.
Okay, but this isn't just a story about a problem. It's also about the incredible search for solutions. So what does the future of fertility look like? Well, researchers are exploring some really amazing ways to preserve and maybe even restore a woman's biological clock. One of the most promising techniques that's actually being used in clinics right now is ovarian tissue cryopreservation. It's basically a three-step process. First, a small piece of the ovary's outer layer, where all those dormant eggs live, is surgically removed and frozen. Then, later on, when the patient is healthy and ready, that tissue can be transplanted back. And get this technique has already led to over 130 live births. That's just remarkable.
And if you want to look even further into the future, scientists are now working on something they call the artificial ovary. The goal here is to grow follicles from that preserved tissue completely in the lab. They use a kind of biological scaffold that mimics the ovary's natural environment. If this works, it could one day allow for egg maturation and IVF without ever needing to transplant tissue back into a person's body.
Which really brings us to our final, pretty profound question. As we keep unraveling all these complex molecular pathways, the accelerators, the brakes, could we one day have real control over the biological clock? Not just preserving fertility, but maybe even adjusting the very rate at which it winds down. It's a huge thought, and that's where we'll leave it today.